show will begin. Please mute your mics. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Increasing pitching velocity seems to be in the thing today, the thing. But is it safe? Can it be trained safely? What age do we start to do it? To answer this and more, we are bringing in the top gun to help us understand this complicated issue in baseball today. As the research director for the American Sports Medicine Institute, known all over the world as ASMI, a foremost expert on biomechanics of baseball pitching motion, Dr. Fleisig is also the chair of the USA Baseball Medical and Safety Committee, along with being an injury research advisor with Major League Baseball. What a great honor to have him on Baseball Outside the Box, Dr. Glenn Fleisig. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you, Pete. It's good to be back. Good to be back.
Well, it's good to have you, and we'll rock and roll right away because there's going to be a lot of questions. We want to get to it right away. The number one question, and we all know it, it's a question you get all the time on all the shows right now during this unfortunate epidemic. You know, what are the things that players can do while they're at home? I know a lot of coaches are trying to do certain things, especially in the pitching area, so that way when they get outside, they're ready to go, but that could be an issue too because they're not going to have a whole lot of ramp up time. So we know what we're talking about. So let's ask you, I know it's not perfect, and we got coaches that have all levels here, all the way from youth players all the way to the big leagues. We got Brett Strom, big league pitching coach on the show. Thank you, Brett, for dropping by. Really appreciate it. So what do you think, Dr. Fleisig? Where do we start?
Okay, well, to start, first of all, technically, I think people should mute their sounds, like you're saying. And also, I noticed on Zoom, on the top right, there's a speaker view button. So if you hit speaker view, then you see yourself big when we're talking, or when I'm talking, I guess. And right now, it looks like David Beaton is talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go. Mute it. I got it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anyway, now, Pete, to answer your question about what should people be doing now and what's going to happen when we ramp up, obviously, this is a situation nobody expected or anticipated. And really, the answer is different in different situations. So I think the first question is, are we talking about someone who is going to be playing, let's say, summer ball and starting in a month? Or are we talking about someone who's not going to play into the fall? The question is also whether we're talking about high school or college. Are we talking about pitchers or not pitchers? So I'll answer some of those questions. But if it's a baseball pitcher who anticipates pitching in the next month or 6 weeks or something like that, then yes, they should view this as the preseason, essentially an extended preseason, and they should be on their maintenance program. They probably get up to full strength during the spring training take one. So now they should be on a maintenance program where they're doing their bullpen work, long toss, interval throwing, things like that. If it's a position player, then the most important thing is to be keeping in fitness and shape and getting their at-bats if they can. If there's somebody who's not playing spring and summer and playing in the fall instead, I really think they might want to consider this as an off-season and shut down the baseball skills part and just focus on the conditioning and even just doing other athletic things. Obviously, no one's playing other sports either. But so the answer, Pete, is a little different depending on a person's situation.
Glenn, what about, we're talking about a serious injury pitching wise. Right now, what kind of exercises are we talking about? When everybody talks about the deceleration phase, the acceleration, what to strengthen, the legs, the back, or, the backside. Talk a little bit about that to help our coaches out there and what players should be doing in that aspect.
Okay. Well, this week on USA Baseball's website, usabaseball.com, we're putting up a whole series of exercises for this shutdown time right now. That's not the only thing out there. And again, the strength and conditioning is a different animal to some extent for pitchers or position players. In either case, you don't just condition your arm, and you don't just do your skill, your pitching and your hitting. You have to do full body conditioning, and it and it includes your full body exercises, your core exercises, and then if you're a pitcher, it includes some throwing drills as well. So, Pete, there's no quick answer. You should have, depending on your level, you should have a strength and conditioning coach, and you should be doing that with your pitching coach as well, and have a full program. It's not one magic thing.
Absolutely. Listen, we got a question from Terry Ayers. I'm going to take a question right away because we're going to get into other aspects, some of the research you're doing. We'll get into a lot of things, weighted balls, all the different things. But question is, you know, the National Federation of Baseball or high school baseball. Guys, please mute your mics. I think I had most of them. You know, they obviously instituted the pitch count system in high school.
Yes.
The question is, you know, what's been results? Has it been effective? Does it need some changes and some adapting?
Yeah. Okay. So I want to segue into that first of all. We were talking about what people should be doing now, but again, as soon as things as soon as things are allowed to play, people are allowed to play, people are going to want to ramp up really quickly. And one concern I have is the leagues, like the travel teams who miss all this time and money, they're going to try to jam in extra games, or even up to the pro level. So I'm concerned about this having a short preparation time and then a condensed schedule. So these are concerns that we have to deal with. Again, Pete, your question right now, can you repeat your question? Because I didn't.
Well, with the pitch count rules, have you seen an you know, I guess has it helped?
Right.
Have you seen is it trended one way or the other?
Right.
Is there more to do?
Yeah. Okay. So you're talking about the National Federation of High School Sports,
Correct.
NFHS or NHFS, NFHS. Anyway, as you may know, there's USA Baseball, which is the governing body of amateur baseball, and then there's the National Federation of High School Sports. And what happens is the USA Baseball gave recommendations to NFHS, including with ASMI's recommendations, that there should be pitch count limits. As you know, states really had different things, innings limits, etc. A couple of years ago, the NFHS agreed that every state needs to go to a pitch count. However, as most people on this phone call know, it's up to each state. So to answer your question, I'm very pleased with the pitch count limits some states set. Well, some other states have set very loose pitch counts. And some good pitch counts are actually on the website pitchsmart.org. This is a website we made with Major League Baseball and USA Baseball, and it gives the recommended guidelines. Some states are following or matching the pitchsmart.org guidelines, and other states have made it much looser, essentially to get around the rules. I think they are working, but there are some factors working against preventing injuries. One thing is limiting the high school pitch counts doesn't control everything, just like limiting Little League doesn't control everything, because kids, in addition to their high school team, are also on a travel team. And the pitch count limits only apply to the high school competition, and there's no control or rule saying you can't essentially abuse the kid or overuse the kid playing in multiple sports. So it's not just setting the pitch count limits, it's also the education, getting the message out there.
Yeah, and Doctor, I mean, and I'm going to take a couple more questions. We got some great ones coming up. You know, I think it's common sense, but at least I'm trying to use some common sense. A lot of these injuries we're talking about, you know, you had some incredible statistics with Major League Baseball. These things start when they're awfully young, don't they? Yeah. I mean, it's a progression. I mean, we're talking about kids that are pitching at 10, 12, 11, 13, 14 years old.
Yeah. And if you watch NFL football or any football and a guy wipes out his knee, you could say that's the play he tore his ACL, all right? But if a baseball pitcher throws out his elbow and has a Tommy John injury, or a Brent Strom injury, as we would call it, as you might know, Brent was the second one to have the Tommy John surgery. It really didn't happen on that one pitch. What happened was, whether it's a pro pitcher or a college pitcher, there's one pitch where he walks off the mound holding his elbow, but that was the last straw. That's like saying, that last cigarette you smoked was the one that gave you cancer. It's really an accumulation, because when you look in the surgery of the elbow or the shoulder injuries, it's an accumulated injury. Now, when a pro pitcher or college pitcher, high school pitcher, whoever gets hurt, it was kind of, they got hurt because they've been hurting themselves at a faster rate than they've been recovering. So as you pitch, you're always wearing out your elbow and shoulder a little, but exercise is good and natural. The ones who stay healthy do the baseball pitching and then give their body the ample time to recover and do exercise and good nutrition to come back next time. The ones who get hurt, it's not from one day, it's from a pattern of pitching too much without giving your body a chance to recover.
And folks, don't remember, you can go ahead and type some questions here. I want to go back because one of the questions I should have jumped on right away, and that is from Eugene Bleeker. Would you say the exercises are more important, or sequencing and movement qualities during the pitch more important?
Yeah, well, I'm going to say both. Okay, as a good politician, the exercises build the foundation for what your body can do, and then the mechanics allow you to do it to get the best velocity and best performance, but using your whole body. Again, you can't succeed without both. And if you just have good mechanics, if you just have good conditioning and bad mechanics, you're going to get hurt, or the other way around.
And Tony Pluta says, can you also address catchers? And the reason being, you hear this a lot, a kid pitches, then he catches, or catches and pitches. Yeah. Is that a major problem?
Yeah, good question, Tony. So we did statistical testing of amateur baseball pitcher. We did statistical testing of high school and college baseball players who come in for surgery. By far, the majority of them who come for, let's say, Tommy John surgery are the pitchers. About 95% of baseball players who need surgery are pitchers. Donato Restas needs to mute the phone.
I got it.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Anyway, the vast majority are pitchers, but we looked at confounding factors, and one strong confounding factor was the people who are pitcher catchers. So if you were a pitcher catcher, you were 3 times as more likely to get hurt as a kid who's a pitcher in other positions. Again, if you're a pitcher shortstop or a pitcher third baseman, it's not really increasing your risk of injury. Catcher alone really doesn't have a super high chance of Tommy John injury, but a pitcher who also catches is tripling his chance of injury. And that's a fact. Our theory for why we think that happens is, although a catcher only throws a few, let's say, real full effort throws per game, he is still throwing a lot of throws per game. So if you pitch and then you catch at the rest of the game, or you catch the days you're not pitching, it's basically those extra throws, even though they're not full effort, it's just too much throwing on the arm that has gone through pitching. So at all levels, we recommend choosing you're a pitcher and other things, or a catcher and other things, but not being a pitcher catcher.
Mark Sheen asks, I'm fairly certain I've heard or read somewhere that you and ASMI contend that throwing a baseball is an unnatural activity or movement. Can you clarify that?
Yes, I do not say that. I haven't not said that. I was once upon a time, like most people on this phone, I was a little boy and I threw rocks and I threw balls and cavemen threw things. So throwing is natural. I want to say again, throwing is natural. It's a human thing. There was even a paper published in about 2015 in Nature magazine where they showed scientifically the history of throwing. Like I'm saying, from cavemen to current people are throwing. Now, throwing is natural. Throwing a 5-ounce ball 100 times as hard as you can every 5th day is not natural. So again, throwing is natural, but pitching at high volumes is the part that's not natural. So throwing is good, but too much throwing is the problem.
Let's talk about that, the velocity part, because you hear about the UCL You hear that it can only withstand a certain miles per hour, let's call it. I can't remember reading somewhere around 82, 83 or something. That's with the average person. But yet, you know, we're up to, you know, 96, 103, you know, Chapman's unbelievable. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of injuries because of that reason, a lot of velocity. So what's the answer?
Yeah, I think that's it's a big part of the problem, and you hit it right on, Pete. I don't know if that's your question or someone else's, but
I'll take credit for that one, but doctor, once in a
okay.
while I got a good one.
Okay, so first of all, yes, you were making reference to the maximum load a Tommy John ligament, a UCL can take. It was about 80, the stress of an 80-mile-per-hour throw, but that was on normal adult humans. It wasn't on elite athletes. It was that research honestly was from cadavers where we tested the arms of some dead arms that were donated to science, and that's how much the average dead person's ligament could handle. So it's not unbelievable that elite athletes can be conditioned to handle 90 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour. But we've done a study, Pete, where we looked at pro pitchers, and we looked at the relationship between fastball velocity and the torque on the elbow. The torque is rotational force, which is what stresses the ligament. Anyway, what we found out was within a pitcher, it was a very strong correlation that if I throw faster, I'm putting more torque on my arm. But it was a very weak correlation that between me and you, that if you throw faster than me, it doesn't mean you have more torque. So let me say that again. More velocity means more torque. But it's a very strong relationship within a person, and it's kind of weak between different people. What that means is if one dude throws 95 miles per hour and another guy throws 90 miles per hour, I can't guarantee that the guy throwing 95 miles per hour is doing more stress on his elbow and therefore more risk of injury. He actually might have better mechanics, okay? I can guarantee that if one guy throws 90 miles per hour and he throws another pitch 95 miles per hour, I can guarantee that 95 mile per hour pitch is more stressful. So the take-home message from this research is that it's not a crime to have a high velocity, but you have to have high velocity with good mechanics, which will kind of lower your whole graph, flatten the curve, as we say these days. And the other thing is anyone who lives at every pitch being its maximum velocity is living on a dangerous line because every pitch is stressing his elbow. You guys are all pitching coaches. You'll know that the ones who succeed, especially at the pro level, are not just throwers, they're pitchers. And the ones who can rear back and throw a little harder sometimes, but not throw every pitch as hard as possible, they are the ones who will have more longevity or less chance of injury. And they probably will have a better chance of success because pitching is really about fooling the hitters. And if your fastball is all at the same velocity, even if it's fast, people could catch up. But if your velocities have a range, then you're both saving your arm and actually giving yourself a competitive advantage.
Doc, all year round, there's a big difference. And we've got some great questions coming out. There's some debates going on too on chat. You know, and this is a hot topic, so we understand. You know, you're talking about throwing all year round versus pitching all year round. There's a difference there. You know, address that. Is there a rest in pitching? Then there's a ramp up, you know, because you got to ramp up obviously before you start pitching. But yet, you know, can they throw? I mean, they can play catch all year round pretty much. But does that also depend on age?
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of questions there.
That's a lot.
Let's say you had, let's say your ligament, you view it as a rubber band, okay? An elastic thing, a rubber band. And let's say you had a rubber band that you're pulling back and forth. And if you pull it as hard as possible and back, and hard as possible back, you're actually going to get little micro tears in your rubber band. That's what's happening when you're pitching at maximum effort. But think about that rubber band again. If you pull it at half effort back and forth, you can pretty much do that all day and it won't do any damage. That's the same thing how our tissues or ligaments or tendons work. That if you are pitching at sub-maximum or throwing with sub-maximum stress, that's really just good exercise, and that's not really tearing or stressing the ligaments. So really, all the pitch count rules are counting competitive pitches, game pitches. And I wouldn't say that practice pitches don't count, but I would say they count less. So, Pete, I want to say that in an ideal world, we're going to count all the throws and measure all the throws. But if you just counted just your game pitches or your full effort pitches, that are the things that count. Now, as some of you may know, there's a device called the Motus sleeve, M-O-T-U-S. I helped develop it, but I'm not affiliated with them anymore. And what that's trying to do, that device, is it measures the stress on every throw. So I'm telling you, if you throw a throw at 80 miles per hour, let's say that's your high school kid's fastball, 80 miles per hour, and then he throws a throw at 70 miles per hour, that's not 7/8 as much stress. It's probably a different percentage. So just counting them, it's hard. A motor sleeve might be a tool that enables us to kind of make those practice pitches count, because they shouldn't count as much as the game pitches, but they shouldn't count for nothing.
I've got Paul Davies, and then there's two questions here. Paul Davies and Eugene Bleeker. Paul Davies asks, rubber bands, no, excuse me. I apologize there. We jumped ahead. That was my fault. While I look for that, I'm going to ask you this, because, you know, you mentioned the UCL. If it can only maintain so much velocity, then how do we strengthen? Are there muscles to strengthen to help the UCL?
Right. So your ligaments are your last line of defense. Your ligaments keep the joints together when the muscles can't do it, okay? So the muscles and tendons are your first line of defense. So by strengthening your muscles, you are maximizing what your muscles have to do, and then the ligaments have to do less. When your muscles are tired, your ligaments have to do more of their share. So pitchers are more, that's why we have pitch counts, guys, because pitchers are more susceptible to injuries when their muscles are fatigued. And when their muscles are fatigued, there's more stress on the ligaments, plus the accumulation of stress adds up. I want to say we did one study. Well, we did a lot of studies, but there's one study we did that had the strongest mathematical scientific finding ever in our 30 years. And that study found that amateur pitchers who pitched when they were fatigued were 36 times more likely to have surgery than pitchers who didn't pitch when past the point of fatigue. I'm not saying 36%. I'm saying 3,600%. I'm saying a 36 times fold. So I'm telling you, if two kids walked into my lab here and they had long sleeve shirts, and I interviewed them, I had them questions. How old were you when you started throwing curveball? How tall are you? What's your fastball velocity? Whatever. If I asked, do you typically keep pitching after you're fatigued? And one kid said yes, and one kid said no. I'll bet you $36 to 1 that he's the one with the scar on his elbow and the other one isn't. So you could put all other research away, and the only research, the most important thing is when a pitcher is spent, when he's fatigued, take him out of the game. Now, I want to point out that sounds great, but it's not really scientific. It's more like art and feel. And there's a difference in my impression. Maybe your people could chirp in here, but there's a different philosophy in amateur baseball and professional baseball. In amateur baseball, whether from youth level to college baseball, this guy is my best pitcher. I want to get the most I can out of him. And the amateur pitching coach and manager who tend to pitch their best pitchers as much as possible within the rules of their league. And frankly, it works because they'll win more games and they won't have so many injuries to their stars, because sometimes the injury happens when the guy bumps up to the next level. It's an opposite philosophy in the pro level. In the pro level, I've given this guy $7 million to pitch. As the pitching coach, the last thing I want to do is have him blow out his arm on my watch. So there are obviously no pitch count rules in Major League Baseball. Every pitching coach, every manager, and every fan watching the game on TV, and every announcer is second guessing, oh, he needs to come out, he needs to come out. So I think the professional baseball has the best coaches, the professional coaches, and they are doing what I'm saying, which is not because I'm saying it, but because it's right. They are letting their best pitchers pitch, but when they're tired, they take them out for both their long-term and for today's success. And the other thing is they're getting feedback from their pitcher and from their athletic trainer, you know, in the locker room the next day. Hey, how's that guy? I don't know. He's really taking a while to recover. So the pros are doing, the pros, I'm saying major and minor league, are doing the best at taking care of their arms, of their values, of their talent. Whereas in amateur baseball, it's really hard. People have good intentions, but people pitch past the point of fatigue. And that's the only rule, that's the only reason why we had to come up with pitch count rules. If honestly, we could replace all pitch count rules with one rule saying if the pitcher is fatigued, you have to take him out. But honestly, we can't do that because the amateur coaches at different levels either lack that judgment or it just wouldn't happen.
Yeah, and we got to understand that at the younger levels, we're talking about 11, 12, 13 years old, before they even get to high school, you know, a lot of them might be moms and dads that are just doing their best or trying their best. You know, the more we educate them, the better, obviously. We've got some really good coaches at the young levels. And then I always thought, you know, it was important, and this is my opinion, it was important that pitch count started earlier at the younger ages before it did at high school. Now, high school set a great example for everybody else, but if the injuries occur early and we've got to protect young kids, then it should have started at the younger levels earlier. But that's hindsight, and now the good thing is that they're there for now. Hopefully, the more coaches get educated, the better at the younger levels. I think that'll really help. Okay, I'm back to Eugene Bleeker and Paul Davies. Two things. One, and as you know, as a biomechanical expert, Paul asked, what are good mechanics? And also, can you guarantee, and I'm not sure you can guarantee anything when it comes to this issue, can you guarantee everyone that throws harder increases stress, even if they change their mechanics?
Okay. So if you throw harder, if you throw with a greater velocity and don't change your mechanics, I can guarantee you have more stress. If you throw harder because you change your mechanics, you might not have more stress. You might have improved your mechanics. So that question, yes, I don't know how to say it, not negative. If you change your mechanics and that gives you more ball velocity, it doesn't mean it has more stress. Maybe you've made yourself more efficient. What are some of the keys to proper mechanics? That's kind of hard. I'm going to just rattle off a few things, but essentially you need what's called a kinetic chain or kinematic chain or coordination, whatever you want to call it. You need the proper timing and sequences between the different body parts. And I'm just going to rattle off from the feet up to the arm a couple of the things you need to do. Your stride length needs to be a little shorter than your body height, but most importantly, the stride direction needs to be straight towards home plate or a little to the closed side. Especially in the younger level, kids open with their foot on the open side, and that's a flaw. Another thing you want to do is in slow motion video, we want to see that the hips are rotating before the upper shoulders, the trunk. And what that means is the pitcher is using his trunk and kind of getting a twist in his trunk. So at foot contact, when the front foot contacts, the shoulders should be in line with the target, but the hips should have started to open. Another thing that's important in timing is that at the time of foot contact, the throwing arm should be externally rotating up. It should not be flat or down. This is a late arm at foot contact. It should not be up just waiting. It should be on the way up, maybe about here at the time the front foot first touches the rubber. So that's a very key thing. No one's really getting a pitching injury at the instant of foot contact, but everyone has a foot contact, so it's a good checkpoint. From that foot contact position, what we want to do is the pitcher is going to collapse his front knee, not collapse. Kevin Bonder's microphone is on.
Go ahead, I got him.
The pitcher wants to catch his weight on his front knee, but then stabilize his front knee and extend his front knee. So a pitcher who collapses on the front knee, that is a flaw, versus a pitcher who catches his weight and extends on his front knee. Because at ball release, the instant of ball release, you want the trunk tilted forward, which you can get by having the, let's say, left leg of a right-handed pitcher brace up so your left hip stops going forward. Another thing that's important is that the armpit angle should be 90 degrees. What I mean by that, Peter, is that regardless of what arm slot you have, sorry about my glitchiness in Zoom there, but regardless of what arm slot you have, your armpit should be 90 degrees. In other words, at the time of ball release, from a catcher's perspective, catcher's view, if you drew an imaginary line through my two shoulders, the throwing elbow should be on that line. If the throwing elbow is below that line, you got a low shoulder. If the throwing elbow is above that line, you have a high shoulder. Why that is so critical is that's the way our shoulder joints work. So regardless of your arm slot and your pitching style, we all have human shoulders, and the armpit angle has to stay at 90 degrees. Okay, so I'm gonna stop. That's enough for that question, but there was some key mechanics.
No, perfect. And what I want to do is I'm going to take questions, guys, because we got a lot of them. This isn't about me. I want to try to get as many answered as possible. You know, a couple things. Neil Bertram asked, one, you know, how do you measure fatigue? And of course, you've got young kids, older kids, you know, different sizes. How do you measure fatigue so you know what, if you're going to take a pitcher out also, not just pitch counts?
Yes, yeah, exactly. The funny thing is I'm like Dr. Science, Mr. Science, and everything is a measurement. I could tell you a knee angle should be 54 degrees or whatever, but fatigue, which I just said is the most important thing, is the least quantifiable thing, okay? You can't really put a fatigue-o-meter on somebody, okay? And frankly, even in exercise physiology where they measure oxygen and all this stuff, it's really hard to measure fatigue. Fatigue is what, just like they say, pornography, when you see it, you know it, whatever the Supreme Court said. Fatigue is the same thing. When you see it, you know it. So the thing is, the pitching, my suggestion is that the pitching coach needs to know his athlete before the moment of battle. You can't be trying to figure out if this pitcher is fatigued if you don't know the kid. If you know beforehand, you know when he is fatigued, he gives a crunchy face, or he takes more time, or he starts to miss high with ball velocity, or he shakes up the catcher, whatever. If you kind of know his signals, you know what fatigue is. Also, I don't want my pitchers out there thinking and looking for fatigue. I want the pitching coach looking for fatigue. I want the pitcher just thinking about success, not about fatigue and failure. So I really want it. It's really the pitching coach's responsibility to talk to his pitchers between innings, to watch them. And again, if you know different personalities, like when you go out and speak to them on the mound or in the dugout, you can read their answers, and different people are different. But my point is, you can't kind of get to know the guy in the moment of the battle. You have to already know him.
Bob Huber asked, high school athletes, how often types of lifts during the season, and what types of lifts?
Yeah, there's not one right answer for that, but I can tell you this. There's high school level, you said, right?
High school, correct.
Right. So the biggest problem with the high school strength and conditioning is that many schools, the strength and conditioning of the high school baseball is just tailored to the high school football. In other words, a lot of places like in Alabama where I live, I don't know if you heard of our college football teams, but a lot of high school football is king. And so football, the school has more emphasis on the strength coach getting the football players ready, and kind of tries to make the baseball players do the same things, like bench presses, etc. So the amount of lifts, I could tell you, the amount of lifts the football players are doing is the wrong answer for baseball players. But for baseball players, it's not just lifts, it's full body exercises, which includes things from lifts to lower body to core and trunk things. So it should be a baseball specific program, and then throwers or pitchers should have specific exercises as kind of an offshoot of that.
Is during the season, as they're pitching, is there some lifting going on? When would that occur?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I think there's different philosophies. The most common philosophy is that during the season you're trying to do maintenance. you know, there's something called periodization. And periodization means you can't do the same thing every day all year. You can't do it for many reasons, emotional and mental burnout, but also physical burnout. So we know our baseball pitchers might pitch once every 6 days or whatever, have a cycle, and they should have a cycle of what they do in those 6 days. The day after pitching, I do this. The second, third day, I do a bullpen. The fourth day, I do certain kind of lifts. But besides that, they also need periodization during the 12 months. You're not doing the same thing in July as you are doing in December, except for this year, perhaps. But so you need periodization. There's not one right answer. There's a whole field of strength conditioning. But I could just say that exercises and nutrition are part of optimizing the athlete's performance in addition to mechanics.
You know, Mark Sheen asks when it comes to biomechanics, what phase is the kinematic sequence? Is there stress on the arm, and for how long would that happen?
A good question. Okay, so the stress on the arm and the injuries happen only from the time of maximum external rotation, when the pitcher's like this, to maximum internal rotation. So just from the arm back to the arm forward is when the injuries happen. Everything you're doing with the lifting your leg and your stride and your arm path, the stresses are low. All we're doing by coaching those is the arm cocking to the release happens so fast you can't consciously make mechanical motions. So unfortunately, the stresses and the injuries happen in those rapid phases from cocked arm to ball release to follow through, where it's happening too fast to make a change. But you put yourself in the right position leading up to that.
Napoleon Picardo, he says, let's see, are you seeing any specific type of scapular dysfunction leading to more injuries?
Yes, that's a good question. It's called scapular dyskinesis, which is the expression for scapular dysfunction. The scapula is your shoulder bone, is the big shoulder blade, okay? Is the shoulder blade. And your arm bone, your humerus, sits in the socket in the shoulder that is part of the scapula. So I was just talking about that the arm has to be in the proper position, the 90-degree armpit angle. But that also assumes that the socket is in the right place. So scapular dyskinesis, such as winging of the scapula, this is a problem that your shoulder could get hurt because the arm's on the wrong place, but the socket's in the wrong place. So essentially, there are exercises to exercise the trapezius and other muscles, and these should not be overlooked. They are also critical.
Doctor, let's get into also, you know, there's a lot of research you're doing on several things, whether it be weighted balls, we got long toss, there's other things that you and I talked about. It's interesting to match up the American and the Japanese pitchers. Well, let's start with the weighted balls. What's the research behind them? And, you know, and how, and the biggest question I guess I have, again, as a novice, I'm asking, you know, when do you start with them? You know, is it better to start older when your biomechanics are better, or is it when you start younger where, you know, or is it depending on how good you're throwing? What's the issue there?
Okay. So we had a 1-hour roundtable discussion on this, and it's on ASMI.org's website with Dr. Andrews and some of the other experts, Eric Cressy, etc., if anyone wants to watch it. But essentially, there's been a good amount of research on it. And here's the deal. Let me tell you what it does first, and then we can talk about when you should do it. Mm-hmm. But we did some research in the laboratory, in the biomechanics laboratory over here, and we also did some research in the field. And what we found out that when we put some high school age pitchers on a weighted ball program, a few things happen. 3 things happen. Number one, compared to a control group who wasn't doing the weighted ball, they gain more pitch velocity. So it does gain velocity. On the other hand, they also had more injuries. And the third thing is they had more shoulder external rotation, how far back their shoulder could rotate. So we believe that what happens is the weighted ball program, what it does is it essentially stretches out your shoulder so your arm could go back farther, which results in more ball velocity, but also results in higher risk of injury. Our biomechanics research of the weighted balls, we looked at the various balls that are in the program. I don't know if you know, but there's a baseball is 5 ounces, of course. And we looked at 4 ounces and 6 ounces and 7 ounces and even 1 pound and 2 pound balls. And we looked at, with the 1 pound and 2 pound balls, we looked at the hold drill, where you just go through the pitching motion but don't let go. And then with the regular balls, 4, 5, 6, 7 ounce balls, we did pitching, and we also did run and gun, flat ground, throw and run and throw. We found that essentially running on flat ground and throwing gives more ball velocity, which you've seen on the internet. You've seen people have these crazy ball velocities. But it also, in our biomechanics lab, is more stressful than pitching. And also, strangely, the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 ounces, as the ball gets heavier, the stress in the arm actually goes down, okay? So this was controversial, but when you throw we found that when you throw like a 7 ounce ball, baseball, and you pitch it, it's less peak stress than a 5 ounce ball. And that's like weird. Everyone thinks the heavier ball must put more stress. But what happens is the heavier ball, your arm also goes slower. And even though the ball is heavier, the arm is slower. So mathematically, it ends up being less stress. The lighter ball does build up more arm speed. So bottom line is weighted ball throwing has been proven to gain ball velocity, and it also stretches out the shoulder, and it also increases the risk of injury. Now, we have not tested every pitcher doing it. We have not tested every weighted ball program. There's probably some programs better than others. So I think the answer is weighted balls can be used or can be not used. I know some pro pitchers who go both ways, but it has to be part of the full picture. I would not take a baseball team who has a full program, whether it's long toss or bullpens or whatever, and just say, you're doing all this, now I'm adding this on top. If you're adding weighted balls to a full program, you got to take something out of the program. So it has to be part of the full picture. Your program shouldn't be just weighted balls. It could be part of the program, or you could skip it.
You know, and also, what about with the weighted balls? Do you do that, you know, preseason, during season, and there's some differences on how you do that?
Yeah. Again, there's no right answer. I can tell you that I've seen it. If you try to throw a weighted ball that's an ounce or two heavier or lighter, it really messes up your accuracy to start with. Your first throw goes really high or really low. So on one hand, you're kind of messing around, because in the biomechanics lab, it's slightly different mechanics than regular pitching. So my first impression is that's bad. You're doing different mechanics. But my second impression, which is where I land, is that's good. It's actually good to train an athlete by giving them variations of things. So I don't have a problem with it part of being an in-season program. As long as it's part of the total volume consideration. It could be done in season or off season. I don't think it's magic, by the way. I think if you have good mechanics and good strength conditioning, then a weighted ball could help you. But if you're trying to take shortcuts and you don't have good mechanics and don't have good conditioning, it's like a gimmick. It's not going to work. It'll only work if you're doing the other things also.
You know, and I know a lot of these topics, you know, we're not going to get them all done in 1 hour, an hour and 15 minutes. We'll do our best here. Mark Sheehan says earlier, you said that the arm, elbow at foot strike must be above the shoulder. So what kind of work or drills were high school kids doing with the weighted balls? Holds, releases?
Yeah, okay. So as far as the mechanics go, when I say above the shoulder, the elbow is pretty much on the line with the two shoulders, but the hand is above the elbow, okay? Kevon's microphone's on again.
I got him.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that foot contact, if you made a video and did a freeze frame when the foot touches the mound, the hand would be higher than the elbow. But you have to consider not relative to the room, relative to the tip of the trunk. Your reference frame is the trunk. So you want the hand to be up. Now, the question is weighted balls teaching proper mechanics? No. Weighted balls is part of a program, and it does not replace the pitching coach teaching proper mechanics. If a pitcher's arm is late getting up or too early, there are some things to look at, especially the younger kids. Some of the younger kids, high school age, their hands get up too soon because when they break their hand is not above the ball. They do what little kids do, and because the ball is too big, they just hold it like this. They don't get on top of the ball. And so they have a very short arm path. So frankly, our advice is if you are in the proper position at foot contact with the two arms, both being in the proper position, I wouldn't mess with someone's arm path if they got to the proper position. However, if they're not in the proper position of foot contact, then I would then visit what leg path they did and what arm paths they did to either shorten up or quicken up. Again, if your arm is late, there are two possible solutions. One is to make your arm move faster, or one is to take more time with your body, because it's not your arm is late compared to what time the game's on TV. Your arm is late compared to your lower body. So you either have to slow down the lower body or speed up the arm.
Pat Ahern, former professional pitcher, know Pat well. He says he trained as a professional. He had time to prepare. He says, but and what exercise conditioning types would you prioritize for an amateur? Because they don't have that time. There's more time constraints than a pro.
You're saying Pat's question about amateurs, not in this coronavirus, just in general?
No, in general.
What
Yeah, because a professional athlete has a lot more time to condition,
right,
to train, to prepare. But a young kid, a high school kid doesn't have that, or even a travel ball kid.
Well, I'll tell you, before like, let's say age 16, the best conditioning is to let the kid play more than one sport, honestly. The kid who plays baseball and soccer and basketball or whatever, he's essentially cross-training is the expression we're using. And that's the best, because really we want athletes who are pitching. We don't want just pitchers. We want them to be athletes who understand their body, are in good shape. Now, when you get to high school age, it's more realistic that that they're focusing and they're specializing on pitching. And the question, what kind of exercises to do, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah, again, it's hard for me. It's even not my expertise. I'm not the strength conditioning coach.
Yeah, it's a broad question.
You want to use your full body. You don't want to do just arm exercises, but you certainly don't want to do a football training program. The upper body arm exercises need to be more explosive, such as like rubber tubing exercises or some of these throwing drills like long toss. But the body, you need to also have leg and trunk exercises, because if you watch a pitcher in slow motion, you can see it's a chain in all the body parts that are being used.
Victor Castillo, if you're listening, do me a favor. I think I got your question, but just the NM, I think I know. Just let me know for sure, 100%. Let's see. Mark Sheen has another great question. He says, earlier, Doc stated the elbow must be shoulder height at foot strike, and stated correctly that there's no stress on the arm until the arm goes from ER to IR and release. So why does it matter where the elbow is at foot strike?
Yes, good question. The stress on the elbow, on the shoulder, is from ER to IR, like you're saying. If you are capable of having a low elbow at foot strike, but then raising it up by external rotation, you might be able to get away with it. But I think it's hard to do it. I think it's easier to keep it seated in the right position. I do think it might also be dangerous if you have a low elbow and then a proper elbow. It's kind of like your arm bone in the socket is kind of jiggling around a little. And I think you're probably better off. I don't have scientific proof of it, but I think you're better off in a more stable position if you could get the elbow for the arm to be at 90 degrees by foot contact and just keep it there through ball release.
All right, we're going to jump to another part of research you've done. And I've spent about 25 years in Japan, gone there a lot, worked with players. Again, pitching is not my expertise, so I'm a little bit of a novice. But when I look at the Japanese pictures, it seems like biomechanically they're pretty good, but also, you know, they stop at certain phases, then they go, you know, in the old days, it used to be, you know, they called it rushing. Don't just, you know, let your body go forward right away. That's seems to be not really the biomechanical movement. So talk about the differences between the two and what you found in your research.
Yeah, okay, good question. We did 2 studies and kind of found the same thing. In both studies, had pitchers come into the biomechanics lab. I have a partner lab in Japan, and they collected the data the same way we collected it. We collected professional minor league pitchers, minor league pitchers in our lab in Birmingham, and they collected professional pitchers, Japanese pitchers, in their lab. The reason I use minor leaguers is I had minor and major leaguers, but my minor leaguers were more a better demographic match to their pros, okay? And even though we used our minor leaguers and their pros, our pros were bigger and heavier and had more ball velocity than theirs. So we try to control it as best we can. We then looked at the mechanics, which was the purpose of the study, and we found out the Japanese pitchers have a longer stride, and they also don't extend their knee as much as the American pitchers do. Remember earlier on, I said one of the things is to stop you collapsing on the front knee. The Japanese pitchers don't collapse on the front knee, but they have a longer stride and sit lower, and they have more front knee flexion. So the Japanese pitchers had more front knee flexion. We also measured the forces on the elbow and the shoulder, and the American pitchers had higher forces on the elbow and the shoulder. However, they also had more body weight, okay? So when we said force, the American pitchers had more. When we said force per body weight, the Japanese pitchers actually had higher shoulder force than the American pitchers did. And my colleagues, who are some orthopedic surgeons in Japan, they don't have the rash of Tommy John injuries we have. In fact, their biggest problem is still shoulder problems. So what this research seems to be saying is the American style of pitching seems to put more stress on the elbow, and the Japanese style seems to put more stress on the shoulder.
Now, interesting effect in the World Baseball Classic and a lot of events that I've done in the Olympics, one of the issues that comes up, that actually came up, we know that the pitching mounds in Japan are a lot softer than ours. Is there any correlation between that? I realize injuries can occur in a lot of other areas, but is there some correlation there?
Yeah, well, there's also another elephant in the room, that the Japanese pitchers, the highest honor is the high school tournament called Koshien.
Very familiar with it.
So, and at the high school level, they are pitching 100 full effort pitches every day.
Yes.
So that's the biggest difference between amateur Japanese baseball and American baseball, is the volume. And another difference is the surgery. So I honestly believe more Japanese pitchers get injured than ours, but it might be a little even more of a Darwinism where they don't advance. As far as the things you were saying, the mound, there's the mound and there's also the ball itself, okay? The mound in Japan they have different types, and some of them are more gravelly, but now a lot of the pro teams in Japan are switching more to the American mound style. In America, all the professional mounds, major and minor league, are made with the same kind of dirt, okay? But in Japan, they have different regions with volcanic and different areas, and so they have different types of mounds. So they are trending to get more towards our mounds, but they still have a variety of mounds. Their ball is also different. Their ball is also tackier or stickier, and so some pitchers who've switched from Japan to America or America to Japan have also commented about that. That's an adjustment as well.
You know, and you know, because I'm here trying to monitor also some of the people coming in. So when you're landing on a softer mount, is it better for you, or is it less stress, or does it matter?
I don't know.
There's not a study on that. Okay,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
and that's fair. That's understandable. And folks, just so you know, I'm going to throw this in there before Dr. Fleisig says anything. I'm going to give you a little history here.
Pete, I just want to say something.
Yeah,
When,
go ahead.
when we compare the American pitchers versus the Japanese pitchers, they were using a similar type of mound. It was an American type of mound. It wasn't a Japanese. It was an indoor mound in the Japanese lab. So that study where I said the differences
Gotcha.
didn't have the mound factor. Go to your story.
And you know what? Might as well throw this in there too. They also go on 6 days rest. Difference there. Is there a difference if you go on 6 days rest and you come back here in the States, you know, and you're playing in the States as a Japanese and you're going on 5 day? Plus they try to change their routine sometime. The Japanese have a lot stricter, a lot more stressful routine, you know, throughout the year. I mean, they'll throw bullpens, they'll throw 100 pitches right after the next day. They'll throw in the bullpen 100 pitches.
Right. I assume you're talking about the professional level, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right. And yes, I've just heard anecdotal. I've just talked to a few of the Japanese pitchers and the doctors, but anecdotally, yes, it's a big adjustment factor. They like their style of pitching 100 pitches every day in the bullpen, and then the American teams are saying that's not how we do it here, and then it's the ball. So some of the Japanese pitchers, as you know, have come and blown out their arm right away.
I got it.
Yeah.
So just keep going.
But there's not enough scientific data to say for sure it's a problem. But I can say changing your culture and changing your habits is going to be difficult.
Well, quick history. I took a Japanese team, older guys, about 20, 28, to spring training a long time ago with the White Sox. But give you a fast one here. 4 years ago, I sat with the high school association in Japan, and they're talking about pitch counts. They're looking at what we were doing, and I said, well, we're going to make some changes, but it's gradual in Japan, right? So just recently, I was in the Premier 12. I was in the lobby with the high school guys, high school association. I said, by the way, how's that coming with the pitch counts? I already knew because I saw it in the newspapers. They said, oh, we got a lot of progress. I said, well, tell me about it. Well, they said, we now allow high school pitchers only to pitch 500 pitches in a week. And I was drinking coffee. I almost spit the coffee out. That's progress in Japan. You know, and I'm thinking, and I know, you know, I've worked with Japanese players. To me, and again, not being an expert, but thinking about, man, they're pretty strong in their quads, hamstrings, their backside. These kids are physically fit. And I'm not saying that, you know, I had high school kids who threw for me 400 pitches on a weekend in Japan, which was incredible. I was like, wow, I can't believe they did that. But their strength and flexibility, I'm not saying you should do this, but their strength and flexibility are incredible to where if we took a high school kid and we put him in Japan and put him in that system, he'd break down in 3 weeks, maybe even 3 days. So I guess my question is, with the strength and flexibility that you have, how do you get our kids to get stronger, flexible? What's the protocols to make sure that they can handle the stress?
Yeah, you know, again, I went to Japan this past October, and when I gave a lecture, they were saying, yes, this pitch count thing, they said, Dr. Fleisig, it's happening slowly, but the mentality is changing, where they're starting to see the need for it. So their mentality is getting there. But we have a lot more pitching injuries than they do, in some extent, because our guys are bigger and stronger. And we have a lot more injuries in America now than we did 20 years ago, because today's American baseball players is bigger and stronger than 20 years ago. So again, as I said, ligaments are the last line, and that's what tears. But I kind of didn't give the full story, that muscles are what move your body around, but ligaments and tendons have to kind of keep up with it. And when our athletes are strengthening, they're really strengthening their muscles. That's the only thing that our body strengthens easily. And the ligaments and tendons can be overwhelmed by too strong of muscles. So if you really have powerful athletes, baseball players, it would be very hard to have them pitching every day, because the ligaments and tendons could not recover from that. So I think part of the Japanese situation is they are, in general, their baseball players are not as big and heavy and tall and powerful as ours. So it's a little different situation.
Okay, one thing they've been doing for 1,000 years, that's long toss. They've done it for a long time. I've had guys that play long toss when they're not playing a game. They're long toss in Japan. Can you talk about long toss? You mentioned, I think you off there, we were talking about there's research behind it. How does long toss help you? I know Alan Jaeger has I suppose, a great program out there on long toss. How does that help you along? It's not just long toss, it's a combination of things, right?
Yeah. So first of all, very nice. You said Alan Jaeger, not Alan Yeager. That is the correct way to pronounce the guy's name.
Good friend.
Yeah, I know him also. So I'm going to say long toss and even partial effort pitching, which is part of rehab and interval throwing programs. Those and weighted balls are all in the same bucket. They are throwing exercises, throwing drills that are going to build up your strength and your athleticism. Okay. We've done biomechanical studies to answer your question. We did it in the lab here, but we also took our lab out to the field, and we measured what happens when a baseball pitcher does long toss. How does that compare to pitching? And what happens is when you throw 60 feet, 90 feet, 120 feet, the mechanics stay pretty similar to pitching. But once you get to the farther distance, up to 120 feet, but hard on a line. But once you get to farther, like 180, 150 feet, 180 feet, or 200 plus feet, mechanics start to change. In particular, what we find out is when you get to this farther distance, you actually get more external rotation at the shoulder than pitching. And also, as you get to the farther distance, your front leg starts to open up more, and your trunk stays more upright. You don't tilt forward like you do in pitching. So what the biomechanics research shows is that I could very comfortably say that if you throw hard on a line, 150 feet or less, 180 feet even, those are good exercises for pitching. When you throw as far as you can on an arc where 250 feet or whatever, I could say that is more stressful than pitching, and that is also more external rotation than pitching, and that is also different mechanics. Now, I cannot say that it's bad, and I cannot say it's good. I'm just saying that if you keep it to about 150 feet, you are doing exercises that are comparable in stress to pitching. If you're doing longer toss, like 250 feet, 220 feet, you're doing exercises that are more stressful for pitching, and I'm going to leave it to you to decide if you want to put that in your routine. I personally would not. I think pitchers get hurt enough. I think pitching is stressful enough on the elbow, so I wouldn't do exercises that are more stressful than pitching. But if you have exercises that are more stressful for basketball players or baseball batters, they're not, 1/3 of them are not coming in for surgery because they're breaking down. So I'm okay with that. For pitchers, I personally would not include exercises that are more stressful than pitching. So I personally would limit it to how far you could throw on the line, and I would not let them throw any distance where they have to arc it.
All right, I'm going to get Eugene Bleecker in on a question here. A little bit over my head. Well, matter of fact, way over my head. Real good question, it sounds like. But he says you mentioned muscles as the mover. What are your opinions on the ECM system, which I have no clue what that is, and the fascia research? And then he mentions Dr. Ingber at Harvard on the biotensegrity. Boy, I botched that one up, didn't I, Doc?
Well, I went to MIT. I didn't go to Harvard. So I honestly, Eugene, I actually don't know. I don't understand the question myself. I don't know what the EC stands for. And maybe Eugene, you want to Eugene, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, let me get him. I can unmute him. Eugene, you okay?
I see him there.
Yeah. Eugene, you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Eugene.
Yeah, so if you look at Dr. Ingber's research at Harvard University and the Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering, one of the papers that he wrote on the science of, or it's the architecture of life back in Siam in '98, showed that everything in the human body, down from the smallest cell to the largest of the large, is a biotensegrity unit, which comes from Levin's work as well. Just that the system is based on tensional integrity. So basically the bones are the compression, and the outside, the ECM, the fascia, that's the net or the continuous web of tension that's holding everything together. In biomechanics, a lot of the focus is on the bones and their positionings and their movement, but that's because they're stable, which is why we measure them, but they're not actually what's moving us, right?
Correct.
So what is like like if you look at Graham's work on the elbow as a biotensegrity unit, and you know, then kind of look at some of the way that this has gone, what are your opinions, if any, or have they changed in understanding some of those things? And, you know, based on what you were saying earlier about, say, like even the cocking phase or throwing, you know, if the arm works, what we find, because we actually have a biomechanics lab, what we find is that velocity can go up in a lot of pitchers, and stress level and NM can go down if you change the way that their forearm is actually getting from ball strike, or front foot strike, I should say, into release. A lot of people think that it's a catapult, right? But it actually works, when it works well, more like an unwinding whip, which actually disperses the stress through the biotensegrity system. So it takes it off of the elbow. And so have you done any research on that? Has any of that stuff that's come out changed any of your opinions on some of this, or?
Yeah. Okay. So again, I would say some of that is over my head and not in my field. A lot of that is exercise physiology versus biomechanics. But I could comment on the part that I do understand, or that I do have expertise in. And the thing about the catapult or the extending of the arm, I do agree with what I believe you're saying, which is that it's not really an active extension of the elbow. It's more of a kinetic whip, where you put yourself in the right position. Because frankly, your triceps muscle does not pull that hard to extend your arm. It's really the whipping around of the body. If anything, the biceps muscle is doing more work to put on the brakes after ball release. So yes, from a mechanics point of view, you get most ball velocity without ripping your arm off by having proper coordination of having your bigger body parts move the smaller body parts in basically like in a whip or a kinetic chain. I agree with that. As far as the roles of the muscles and the bones and everything like that, again, I'm just going to simplify it because for everyone's sake, plus I don't have expertise in everything you said, but our brain tells our muscles what to do. Our muscles are connected to the tendons. Tendons are what hold muscles to the bone. And so our brains tell our muscles what to do, and then they contract, and attached to the tendon, they move the bones. The ligaments are just the extra soft tissue holding the joints together. They're really more passive, just kind of holding things together. So even though we have conditioning programs, muscles, tendons, and ligaments, because of how they give vascularity and blood flow, they don't strengthen equally. If you hit the weight room or whatever, your muscles are going to receive the most of the benefit from the exercising, and that leaves our tendons and our ligaments to try to keep up. And tendons and ligaments get hurt when, by proper physics and proper mechanics, our muscles move our body parts so much and so fast we have good performance, but it's a lot of stress on the ligaments and tendons. Is that consistent or satisfactory with what you're saying, what you're asking?
Yeah, I would say that it's, so if you look at the research on the ECM system and biotensegrity, it kind of lends to the fact that like, it provides a different model for the human body. Traditionally, the way that we look at the human body is based on, you know, the Borrellian model, looking at, you know, fulcrums and levers, and
Yes.
Makes a lot of assumptions on fulcrums and levers, but it shows that we're not actually fulcrums and levers, and that there's almost like two different systems. Kind of like if you're in a car and you're going to go uphill and you want to bring a lot of heavy weight, like you have to switch gears, right? Like, so that's how you're going to use your muscles, right?
Yes.
But the twitch and the stretch reflex actually comes from the ECM system and the fascial network. And when you're, you know, moving through a dynamic, you know, like a throw, like such a dynamic and high, you know, twitch throw, that you actually don't want to use the muscular system. You want to predominantly use the ECM to drive them.
Agree. And now Eugene, I'm gonna cut you off here a little because okay, someone just said ECM is extracellular matrix, is what you're saying. But I'm just gonna cut you off, and I want maybe Pete could hook us up by email. So
and I was going to suggest that.
I don't want to. We're going a little too scientific, I think, but I do want to continue this with you, and I do want to say I do agree that to say each joint is just a simple lever is not how our bodies are designed. Our bodies have a beautiful design with different muscles and different tendons and different angles of everything. And yes, your fast twitch, which baseball players have to have, and eccentric action versus concentric action are terms I don't really want to get into, but I do agree that the ultimate baseball players are benefiting from those things. So Eugene, we'll talk about that separately.
Thank you.
Eugene, thanks so much for being on the show. Appreciate it. Thanks for making it sound a little bit more simple for me, because some of those terms were a little complicated, but thank you, Eugene. Listen, we got, folks, just so you know, we've got about 15 more minutes. We're going to 8:30 Central Time. So a couple things. One, Doctor, everybody knows about the towel drill, and the towel drill's progressed. Some have said the towel drill can actually hurt your elbow. I've heard some guys speak at conventions about it. Talk about that, because Donata Resta had that question about stress to the ulnar radius bones by blocking the release of the downward motion with the unhealthy towel drill. Now you see people holding a ball with a towel drill. You see different areas where the towel actually hits. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so I've been at ASMI since the 1980s, and I've interacted with a lot of coaches, and I don't want to name names, over the years, who have champion some of these things. And where I am right now is I don't see really the benefit of the towel drill. I don't really see the benefit of shadow pitching, where you're just going through dry pitching with no ball in your hand. And the other one is, even in the weighted ball program, I didn't get too much into it, but the 1 pound and 2 pound, the heavy ball where you hold it, I don't really see the benefit, biomechanics benefit of any of those exercises. I think they're a little too off the mark from pitching mechanics. They might have benefit, but I don't see it for any of those.
Let me ask you that, because being with Tom House, I remember Tom talking about I believe the University of Southern California study where they hold on. The tennis players don't get, major injuries in the elbows. They get tennis elbow because they're holding on to the racket. So then they started holding on to the balls because that's a decelerator. And then the brain can actually understand if your arm should speed up or not, because the muscles are stronger. Is that on the right path?
That's what Tom says. I don't agree with that. Okay. One thing, an interesting thing that didn't really catch on, I saw some people talk about having instead of holding onto a weighted ball or a racket, but having a weighted glove on the hand with no fingers, but having a glove that basically has a few ounces of weight on it. And I think that would have more, I don't know why that didn't take off, but I think that would have more value, because you could still go through the full pitching motion. But holding a tennis racket or holding a ball or holding a towel and not letting go, I've seen that the mechanics don't really mimic pitching mechanics.
Okay, the mechanics don't mimic, but let me ask, does it strengthen the muscles for the deceleration
I don't
phase?
see it. I don't see it. I've measured some of those things, not extensively, but to some extent. And the forces are less, because even though you have a resistance thing, you're moving your arm much slower than real pitching. And therefore, you're not training your body how to move fast, but you're also not putting that sharp, high-level force. So I don't really see a great value in those.
I've seen this. Let me ask you about this. I've seen where guys have, they'll do drills where they're doing some shuffles, and they don't have a ball. They have a glove possibly. And sometimes they do have a ball. They'll do shuffles and throws, shuffle and throws, and they're trying to speed up the arms. And I'm assuming that's speeding up the brain too. Does that make any sense?
I'm not really sure what it looks like.
Well, let's put it this way. I made a mistake on that. Let's talk about this. If I stand there and I work on speeding up my arm as fast as I can, I train to do that daily. Does that help?
Yeah. Okay. Again, you have to train from force or strength to power and speed, okay? And I think the ultimate speed drills are pitching or throwing, okay? So I don't think any of those exercises you're saying are ultimately a high-end speed thing, but on the spectrum, a exercise program should have things from squats to pitching, and I would say where squat might be a full body, high force, low speed thing, and I would say those drills you're saying are closer to the pitching end, but they're not as explosive as pitching.
Okay. Let's get to recovery, because I'm assuming after pitching, I mean, it probably could have been the first thing, but it's the most important thing is how do we recover? Not only to recover to be healthy, but also recover to be able to pitch again at maybe a day earlier.
Yeah. So, so that's a good question, because I said at the beginning that pitching injury is not because you threw one pitch too hard. It's because you've been stressing out your arm faster than you've been recovering. And so if I'm saying that to stay healthy, you have to pitch without overstressing your arm, hopefully with good mechanics, and then that has to be coupled with proper recovery so your arm can get better. One thing is about icing. You and I spoke about that offline.
Yes.
Okay, and that could be part of recovery. Okay, now the medical thinking about this and my thinking have kind of gone different ways over the years, and it used to be nobody iced and then everybody iced, and now there's a backlash and people are saying ice doesn't help, and then some people are saying ice is actually bad for you. I've looked at the science. I don't think any of the research showing icing is bad for you is valid. I think icing is okay if a person is recovering or recently had an elbow or shoulder injury. If a person is recovering and had an elbow or shoulder injury, I do think they should ice. Okay, if a healthy pitcher, I think the healthy pitchers should have the option to ice, and frankly, it helps some people and doesn't help other people. I do not believe it does any harm. I believe the worst it does is it makes your arm cold and wet, or a waste of time. So I think from what I've seen from the science is that icing should be available to all the players. The players who have a recent history of injury should have to ice, and the other players should be left to have their choice.
What other areas of what else can you do, I guess, other than just
right.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people, and I'll be honest with you, I did a show with Gary Reinell on this, who wrote the book on, you're familiar with it, so we could talk about that later with Gary. But what else is there when it comes to recovery?
Okay, now, performance enhancement drugs, this is really where they work, and of course, I'm not pushing them, but I'm saying that they do work, and I want to point out that steroids and stuff don't work by putting a little magic in you like Popeye the Sailor Man and you become strong. What they do is they speed up your recovery, okay? And I recommend not using performance enhancement drugs. However, it sounds very boring, but there's a natural performance enhancement recovery, which is good nutrition. So a lot of the teams and a lot of the teenagers and travel, and it's like the most boring thing to talk about. People want to talk about lifting weights and throwing long toss and stuff, but something to help with recovery, and at the pro level, there's been more of a focus on this. Good nutrition is actually your natural performance enhancement drug to help you. So I think proper nutrition is overlooked and a big part of recovery.
And I got to believe at the top of that list has got to be sleep. Sleep is becoming a big thing as I read things. Again, not being an expert in it, but that's got to be huge.
Right. I was going to say that, but I felt like I'm saying too many different things or throwing too many things. But yes, the sleep cycle. And then, again, the pro teams, they fly from Seattle to New York, and they're all whacked out of time. So sleep, a lot of the teams have even taken, a lot of the players bring their own pillows with them. Sleep is a big part of recovery as well.
Doc, we're coming to the end. I cannot appreciate it so much, an hour and a half with all our coaches. And I know there's so much to this topic. I mean, we can go in so many different areas. We could isolate just one area as one show. But, it's sometimes just about getting general information out there too. let's take it home with, you know, what's on the forefront, what's coming up. What is there new research, new science, new things that are coming up that, you know, we should be aware of?
I could tell you the latest thing we did. We did a couple of studies sponsored by Major League Baseball. What would happen if we lowered the mound, and what would happen if we moved the mound back? And we just published these papers so I could talk about them, and Major League Baseball funded them because Major League Baseball is frankly considering options for how to get more offense in baseball. Now, one option last year was there were a lot of home runs, but before that, batting averages were down with the shifts and bullpen. Anyway, so we did biomechanical research, and we found out that lowering the mound would be the same or perhaps a little less stress on the arm, but we do not see any advantage or difference to the batter. Those of you who are old enough, in the 1960s, Major League Baseball lowered the mound and offense went up. But I honestly think it was not from lowering the mound. I actually think it was from making the strike zone smaller, which they did it that year also. So lowering the mound does not seem to change performance in our studies, but it would not hurt. If anything, it would be a little safer, but I don't see a need to do it. The next thing that Major League Baseball had to study was what would happen if we moved the mound back a little. 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 feet, whatever. And what we found out was it really wouldn't change the pitcher's mechanics or stress on their arm. So I think it would be safe enough to, I don't think it would have an effect on the stress per pitch on a pitcher. But as far as would that improve performance, on one hand, yes, because we found out that, you know, you don't have to have a biomechanics degree, but if you move the mound back farther, the batter has more time before the ball arrives. It takes longer for the ball to get there. However, we also found that the fastballs and the curveballs had more break to them if you move it farther back. So if you move it farther back, the hitters might like the extra time, but they might not like the extra break. So it's not obvious that moving it back would help the batters. But so those are some of the things we worked on most recently.
Super. We got 2 minutes. Let's take it with this. We're going to have a lot of young coaches working with younger players, even below high school, actually below high school, listening to this later. It's going to be on YouTube at Peter Caliendo. It'll be on social media. We'll also, if anybody wants it, just let me know. You know, the last thing here with the young kids, you know, explain, you know, you see a lot of big league pitchers. None of them will pitch 3 days in a row, but yet I've seen young kids being pitched 3 days in a row. Explain what they need to be doing with these young kids when it comes to pitching as far as a day and then rest. And I know the pitch count, we have Pitch Smart, and everybody can go to USA Baseball, can go to ASMI, see the Pitch Smart program, but kind of talk to that, you know, fairly quickly here.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, I also want to say we did a pitching distance study for kids also. We looked at 46 feet, 60 feet, and the 54-foot intermediate league. And we did find that the 54-foot distance was a moderate amount of stress. So towns that are able to have an intermediate league distance, we do recommend that. The data wasn't strong enough to say that it was required, but given the choice, jumping from 46 feet to 60 feet at age 12, 13 is a tough load on the arm. Now, as far as the young kids go, pitch counts limits are there because of what I'm saying, that we have more high school pitchers being hurt ever than before, because at the youth and high school level, there are things like travel ball and stuff like that, which we didn't have when I was a kid. When I was a kid, we had 14 weeks of Little League, and that was it, or your school's spring season. So we need pitch count limits. And the other thing is, a youth pitcher who pitches more than 100 innings in a year is much more likely to have an injury, a surgery, or quit baseball because of injury. So at the youth level, I really want to encourage following pitch count rules, and maybe playing some other sports as well. And don't think that your favorite baseball pitcher is pitching 100 pitches as hard as you can 365 days a year, because that's not who they are now. And frankly, that's not who they were when they were kids. They were playing multiple sports. So have fun and be good at baseball, but you'll be better off mentally and physically and success if you do other things as well.
All right. And I want to leave it for the younger coaches that are working with young kids before high school. You know, the other thing is develop more pitchers. First get them to throw right, then develop more pitchers. Even if they pitch an inning, they feel good about themselves. Maybe they pitch to the eighth, ninth hitter, you know, just to start off. But the more pitchers you have, the more teamwork you have also. So I think that's important. Coaches are important, educating coaches. And Dr. Fleisig, I cannot thank you enough for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Okay, everyone stay safe from this coronavirus, and hopefully we'll see each other in person someday soon.
And a special thank you to everybody who joined us tonight, especially on Zoom, because there's so many great podcasts out there that you guys can go anywhere you want. I want to thank you for joining us. Thanks for joining us on Facebook Live. Thank you to Dr. Fleisig. Thank you to our producer, Brian Kroc, with the Lineup Media Group. Please stay safe. I'm your host. You're going to have this on YouTube at Peter Caliendo. And check out tomorrow. We got Big League Pitching Coach tomorrow, 1 o'clock Central Time, Chicago time, with the St. Louis Cardinals. Again, thanks to everybody. This is Baseball Outside the Box, the show that loves to interview baseball's best coaching minds who love the challenge of status quo. I'm your host, Pete Caliendo. Stay safe, stay home, get out at least a little bit in the sunlight, but we're all going to be back soon playing baseball. God bless you all, and thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.